On May 2nd of this year, the Writers Guild of America, or WGA, went on strike. About 2 months later, on July 14th, the Screen Actors Guild American Federation of Television and Radio Artists, abbreviated as SAG-AFTRA, joined the WGA on the picket line. Their opponent was the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers, or AMPTP, representing the various studios that have been working towards creating a gradually more and more inhospitable industry for writers and actors in recent years. Today, I want to explore the reasoning for these strikes, as well as what impact they may have on the film and television industry going forward through the lens of economics. Firstly, let's discuss some of the major problems that the strikes aimed to address. The first major problem was the gradual shift toward a streaming-focused industry. The streaming service system consistently encourages the frequent production of shorter, often lower-budget shows and movies. Writers and actors rely on consistently finding new projects to work on in order to receive consistent pay. While the model of constantly having new projects to work on may sound like a good thing then, in reality it only creates uncertainty and instability. Lower budgets encourage studios to cut pay for employees, most often for writers in particular, meaning writers and actors end up being paid less and spend more time searching for new projects they can be hired to work on. This perpetuates a consistent cycle of frictional unemployment. The second problem the strikes aimed to resolve was the usage of AI. Using various forms of AI, a studio is able to recreate and use an actor's voice and likeness in whatever way they see fit. Similar to the issues with streaming, this allows studios to minimize how much work an actor has to do, and thus how much they get paid. Similarly, this threatens the job of writers since, as we all know thanks to ChatGPT, certain AI programs are pretty good at very quickly producing long scripts that are close, but not quite, as good as what a human can produce. With no regulations against AI, studios could theoretically eliminate most of the need for actors and writers to produce these projects, which is an obvious threat to those people's jobs and well-being. Before I move on, I do feel it is important to clarify one particular thing. When I have been talking about actors thus far, I assume most of you have been picturing millionaire celebrities who have appeared in Marvel movies or various other blockbusters. And while they are certainly who many immediately think of, they are not the main actors at risk. The problems I have discussed so far primarily affect the working class or amateur actors that make up a large percentage of the industry. Background actors, young and experienced actors, actors working on projects just not for massive studios, etc. The same applies to writers. As previously mentioned, the lower budget restrictions of streaming projects have encouraged studios to primarily cut down on the size of writing teams and how long they are employed for. Even if an amateur writer is responsible for a pitch, producers will often simply hand the project to a more experienced and accomplished writer. This prevents new writers from gaining experience and typical writers from achieving promotions. So with all of that information in mind, the writers and actors unions approached the studios with the intent to negotiate for better terms and conditions. However, they were turned down and the strikes began. A strike is a tense situation. Normally, it cannot end until one side has become pressured to the point where they must end it. Thus, there are two possible outcomes. Either the strikers are struggling so much from the lack of pay that they simply can't continue to not work, or the company is struggling so much from the lack of workers that they must come to an agreement with the strikers to get them back to work. In this case, the studios eventually caved in response to both strikes. The WGA strike officially ended on September 27th, with a new contract officially being ratified on October 9th, with 99% of WGA members in favor. The SAG-AFTRA strike lasted almost 2 months longer, ending on November 9th, with a new contract ratified on December 5th, with 78% member approval. So, new contracts have been established, but what does that mean? Well, both of the major problems I previously discussed have now been addressed. Firstly, improved pay deals have been established for actors and writers who work on streaming projects. Studios are now required to share viewership data with the unions, and as long as a show or movie is viewed by a sufficient number of people, those who worked on it will receive a pay bonus. Additionally, The new WGA contract establishes requirements for a minimum number of writers that must be employed on any given project, with larger projects requiring more writers. And secondly, there are now protections in place against AI. For writers, studios can no longer require the usage of AI for writing purposes, although writers are still allowed to use AI if they want to with studio approval. For actors, stricter regulations have been put in place regarding consent. An actor must now explicitly consent to a studio creating a digital replica of them using AI software. Overall, these two strikes were fairly tense and caused numerous delays and financial difficulties for studios. However, they were very worth it in order to ensure a more stable and employee-friendly industry for the foreseeable future.